The Colorado Buffaloes are legitimate Big 12 and college football playoff contenders, but how?
You are Locked On Buffs, your daily podcast on the Colorado Buffaloes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Buffs. I am your host, Kevin Borba. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. We are also brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for free and available wherever you get your podcast. Joining me today, Dalton Wasserman of PFF. Dalton, Colorado continues to win, and now things are getting really spicy in the top 25 and the college football playoff rankings and the Big 12 standings. So, first of all, I think if anyone knew that Colorado was going to be good, it was probably you, right? You were on all these transfers before. You were ready. I don't know if you were ready to call them a playoff team at the beginning of the year, but I think we both knew that you knew they were going to be somewhat of a contender towards the end of the season. So let's talk about how they've gone from obviously last year 4-8, which was an improvement from 1-11, to now they are winning 4 games away from contending for everything.
Yeah, no, I think what you just have is a more balanced football team, right? And we talked about in the offseason how they filled out their team last year. They just needed to collect talent to put some sort of talent on a 1-11 football team from the previous year. And Deion Sanders brought the guys from Jackson State, Shedeur and Travis Hunter, and some of the other guys that he brought in to make it a little more fun, a little more explosive offense, right? But this year they went in the portal, and it was a much more targeted approach. In the trenches, offensive line, defensive line, linebackers starting to run and stop the run, make this defense better. Obviously, the 2 new coordinators as well with Pat Shermer and Robert Livingston, but it's a much more well-rounded football team where you knew last year was pretty much just Shedeur and the weapons and then all the things Travis Hunter could do. They have a lot more depth on this team. I think especially their front 7 on defense has been, I think, the most drastic improvement, the most impressive part of this team and this process that they've gone through. They're able to stop the run now. They're able to make stops on defense. They're still explosive on offense, and they pass protect a bit better than last year. Is it elite? Is it up there with Texas and the elite teams in the country? No, but I could at least call their pass protection average now, especially Jordan Seaton at left tackle has been really good. I think you just have a team that has more answers, and especially on defense, that's been the biggest part to me is they have a defense that can complement their offense.
Yeah, and I think that was – you talked about a lot, the trenches, right? They were horrible on the defense line last season. They were horrible on the offensive line, and my whole stance on the offensive line all offseason long was the offensive line was so bad last year that if you just get one that's average, like you mentioned, this Colorado team will move mountains because they were – I think it was 4 or 5 one-loss or one-score games last year that they lost, right? Like they were in games, but it was Shedeur Sanders was getting sacked constantly, right? On the other side of the ball, defensively they couldn't stop the run. Now they have Chidozie Nwankwo, who I think his stats don't really show a lot, but it's his impact of collapsing holes, the impact of pushing the quarterback to someone else to get a sack or whatever. Like they have a lot of playmakers that they simply did not have last year. And I think it allows for the guys who are holdovers from last year, like Amari McNeil or other guys like Hank Zelinkas, who's now at center and had his best pass protecting game this past week. I think it allows them to sort of blossom into something that they were expected to be last year. And last year it's like different roles, different scenarios. Contending wise, things are getting a little dicey in the Big 12, right? We're looking at the Big 12 standings, me and you were before the show, and right now, honestly, there's probably let me pull it up real quick on the handy dandy the iPhone. Right now, there's 4 teams that are 4-1 or better. Obviously, you have BYU, Iowa State, who are undefeated, Kansas State, Colorado, 4-1 in conference play, right? So then you have TCU, Texas Tech, Cincinnati, who all have 2 losses, and West Virginia, and 2 losses in conference play. We're gonna erase those 2-loss teams for now and focus on the top 4. It gets dicey up front. Let's talk about what Colorado needs to, maybe make the Big 12 title, because obviously outside of winning everything, right, they need to win out. Otherwise they are done in the conference race. Let's talk about what they need from these other teams, because we were chatting a little bit off the show.
Yeah, no. So I think what you're looking at personally, I think BYU has gotten through the tougher part of their schedule. I think one way or the other, they're going to make the Big 12 title game. Because when you talk about what needs to happen with Colorado is they need Kansas State to lose one more game because they lose a head-to-head tiebreaker, obviously, with them. That was the one game that Colorado lost was a really big loss when it comes to the tiebreakers. And then I think Iowa State's a little more vulnerable than BYU. And for Colorado to get a spot outright, they would need one Kansas State loss and probably two Iowa State losses. Now, the good news is Iowa State and Kansas State do play each other the last week of the season. So one of those two things is at least going to get helped by that. But are they going to lose a game prior to that and can create some sort of scenario where Colorado, can take advantage of that, right? Because I think Colorado has a really good opportunity to win their last four games. I would favor them in their last four games. When you talk about over at Texas Tech, it's a tough trip to Lubbock. That's always a fun road environment to be in. But I do believe they're a better team than Texas Tech, but that's a good game. Home against Utah, who's really struggling at quarterback. At Kansas, who has struggled all year, and Oklahoma State's been struggling all year as well. So I think I would favor Colorado in their last four games, but they have to get to 10-2 first. They do need some help, absolutely, but Iowa State's got a tough schedule. K-State, they've been winning a lot of close games lately, and Avery Johnson sometimes can slip up against teams that maybe he shouldn't. That's what you're looking at to me. I really believe at this point, I think BYU has proven what they are. I think right now they're actually the most well-rounded team in the Big 12, and their last four games, I believe they should win all four of those games and get in. I think BYU's getting in the Big 12 title game. I think that second spot comes down to the other three teams. Colorado's got to take care of business in their last four games and then just hope for the best, honestly. I think from K-State's schedule and Iowa State's schedule, and this season's been chaotic, so it's fully possible.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. And before we move on to sort of the little pop quiz I have, because Dalton, I'll give you a quick little sneak peek of what I'm about to ask you. We're going to go through the top four teams real quick and determine what their toughest game is remaining. And so if you want to mentally prepare for that while I talk about the tiebreakers, the Big 12 announced the tiebreaker procedures to determine the 2024 conference championship as follows. So it goes head-to-head results among the tied teams. So obviously, say Kansas State and Colorado were the final two teams contending for a bid. Kansas State would get the edge because obviously they beat Colorado. Record against all common conference opponents. This is unsettled because obviously they still have a handful of games to play. Record against the next highest placed conference opponent in the standings, proceeding down. So obviously you would look at whoever, if Colorado's ranked above this team, what's their record against the team below them. Combined conference winning percentage of conference opponents. So basically, strength of schedule. Overall wins in a 12-game season, only one win against an FCS or lower division team. Highest ranked by Sports Source Analytics using rating score metric. And then if it gets too complicated, they finish with a coin toss at America's favorite, right? A little coin toss game. So hopefully for Colorado, it doesn't come down to all that because I just feel like that's one of those things where it's like, your strength of schedule was 26th and theirs was 25th, right? Like it'd be a tough way to go out. You really hope for one of these teams to lose. So starting with Colorado, which game do you view as the toughest remaining on their schedule? I'm going to personally go with their next game against Texas Tech, actually. Rowdy road environment, like you mentioned. Texas Tech is known for being a team that could sling it around the yard. I don't know if they could keep up with Shedeur Sanders, but I don't know if Colorado's played a team that's as effective in the passing attack as Texas Tech.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it is that game. It's a tough road environment because you look at their other road game at Kansas that's actually being played at Arrowhead Stadium. And, Kansas really has lost a lot of games, probably a lot of disinterest there. But I think the big thing with Texas Tech for me, too, is that they do have an explosive offense. And the running back, Taj Brooks, is an absolute bowling ball. I think he would be a guy just like DJ Giddens did, who could challenge Colorado's run defense with yards after contact and breaking tackles and picking up positive yards in a very similar manner to DJ Giddens when they lost to Kansas State. He controlled that game. He controlled the clock. Now, Texas Tech's defense is not very good at all. I won't lie to you. For us, they have the fourth worst coverage grade in the Power 5. You'd probably get a very high-scoring game, but that would be another big test for Colorado's run defense to get through with a great running back in Taj Brooks. I'm with you that I think it's the Texas Tech game. If they get by that, especially with getting Utah at home, and as much as Kansas and Oklahoma State have struggled this season, I think there's a very, very clear road to 10-2.
Yeah, okay. We're in agreement there. So moving on to Kansas State, their toughest game. I'm going to go with a little bit of a shocker here. I'm going to go with Arizona State. I'm on the Scadaboo hype train. I liked him at Sac State. I like that he does a little bit of everything. outside of the Iowa State game, which I think we both know is going to be tough, Kansas State has looked vulnerable, right? They're coming off a 27-29 win against Kansas, where we just talked about it. Kansas is not a very good team, and realistically, they probably should have won that game. I think they had a legitimate shot at the end. They were leading 27-23 at the end of the third quarter and just could not hold on to their lead. So I like what Arizona State kind of brings to the table, especially if Sam Leavitt is healthy. And it seems like for Oklahoma State, it seems like he's kind of healthy, but I think by then he should be back to 100%.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think what you have with Kansas State is a team that they've gotten away with a few, right? And they play such a conservative style of offense. And that, in that game, Kansas, that was the story of Kansas season right there. It's right, where they're so close and the turnovers just kill them. The Jalen Daniels turnovers have killed them all season, and they've lost a bunch of one-score games. That's really the story of their year. I think I'm with you. I think there's a couple of tough games in here. I think the Arizona State game is tough because they're a super physical, aggressive football team. What Kenny Dillingham has them, just the attitude they play with. They play with as much attitude on tape as I've seen, from any team all year. And I think actually even a game against Cincinnati is not easy, right? I think when you talk about a team that's very fundamentally sound, I know Colorado took care of business against them, but they're two teams that really, they dare your quarterback to beat them. And that's not Kansas State's preferred style, at least through the air, right? Kansas State wants to line up and run the ball. I'm with you. I think outside of the Iowa State game, I think at Iowa State is obviously the toughest game. But the Arizona State game is fun because I think Arizona State is willing to match the level of physicality that Kansas State plays with. And if they keep that a low-scoring game, kind of like they did against Utah, then they definitely have a shot to stay in that thing and possibly win it.
Hopefully it doesn't come down to a kicker for Arizona State. I've heard they've had some issues. Moving on to Iowa State, they actually have 5 games remaining, which is a little different. Their toughest game to me, this is where it gets difficult because I want to say Texas Tech, but I don't think Texas Tech matches up well with them. I was actually talking to our Locked On Texas Tech host yesterday for our big Locked On Big 12 crossovers, and it's supposed to be really cold in Ames, Iowa this week when they play. And it's going to be rainy, it's going to be wet, and so I don't really know if that complements Texas Tech style. So I'm going to go with the cop-out answer here and go with Kansas State to sort of get to the Big 12 title game, right? I mean, Kansas State's playing for a lot this year. Iowa State, obviously, they're playing for a lot as well, but I think it's one of those ultimate trap game scenarios where it's like we're one win away from our goals, and it's like, but you're going to play against a team with elite running backs, elite quarterback, who can not elite quarterback, but elite mobile quarterback. Who do you think is the toughest in these last 5 games?
It is K-State because of the run game and the matchup, but I'm going to give you another interesting one, and that's their game against Cincinnati 2 weeks before that. And I'll tell you why. What you have in Iowa State is a team that wants to throw the football, right? They struggle in the trenches, and they want to beat you with their 2 big-time wide receivers, Jaden Higgins and Jalen Knoll. And here's why I say Cincinnati. Their new defensive coordinator, Tyson Veit, was a long-time disciple of Matt Campbell at Iowa State. Those two teams run the same exact defense, okay? They run a lot of 3-man rush, a lot of drop 8. It's funny because it's a lot of the reason that I thought Colorado would beat Cincinnati is because of that defense, because they pretty much allow the quarterback to sit back there and make throws into the intermediate level. But I don't know that Rocco Becht is quite on that. He's not. I don't think he is, actually, I should say. He's not on that level yet of Shedeur Sanders of consistently making those throws. He gets hot, and sometimes he's really good. But I find it interesting that Cincinnati, the way they've gotten better in coverage is running the same coverage schemes as Iowa State does. And I have to wonder how that plays in that game with two defenses that are incredibly unique. They're really – I believe they're the only 2 teams in college football right now that run their defense like this, and it's because Tyson Veit came from Matt Campbell's staff. I think you have an interesting matchup with Cincinnati and the same defense that Matt Campbell and them run it with the Cyclones, and Corey Kiner and their offense. They're not that bad in offense. They're just not that explosive, right? Why Colorado beat Cincinnati is because they're more explosive. Cincinnati's got a conservative ball control offense with Corey Kiner in the run game. Brendan Sorsby is the guy who really manages the game well within that kind of 10 to 15-yard bubble. They're not that explosive, but they ball control. I think it's an interesting matchup with Cincinnati and Iowa State, where they're 2 similar teams, and we'll see if Cincinnati maybe has the better version of it this year.
Yeah, I think for me, when it comes to three-man fronts, right? You run the ball. So which running back do I trust more? I trust Mr. Scatterbo. And so, or Mr. Scatterbo. I trust the Cincinnati running backs more than the Iowa State running backs right now. I always trust Mr. Scatterbo. That's just a fact. But in that scenario, I trust the Cincinnati running backs because they made some plays against Colorado. I think it was just too little, too late. Moving on to the number one team in the conference, BYU. This one's tough. I'm going solely off of the environment that I expect it to be. And I think it's just going to be fluky. I'm going to go Utah. Granted, Utah has been terrible, but when you mix in the fact that it's a rivalry game on the road, Utah at this point, there's a realistic possibility that Utah doesn't make a bowl game. So now they're in just sort of like derail season mode, which is like we just want to be like ruin someone's season. Who better than your biggest rival or one of your biggest rivals?
Yep, I agree. And I think the other game that jumps out is at Arizona State, but I like that matchup for BYU with their ability to stop the run. And Arizona State's another team, good in run defense. They dare the quarterback to beat you, but I think Jake Retzloff can make it happen. I think this game at Utah next week is the big game for BYU. It's getting through the rival. It's getting through the adrenaline. It's still an incredible home environment over there in Salt Lake. I think you have a team, too, that – with Utah, they want to run the ball. They want to slow the game down, right? It's going to be a physical football game. They play a lot of man-to-man coverage on defense, and they're pretty darn good at it. And I think BYU's wide receivers are good, but there's not a ton of speed, right? I think here and there they pop an explosive play because they're beating zone coverage, and Aaron Roderick is so good at opening those windows downfield, their offensive coordinator. But I think being that it's on the road and being that it's such a big rivalry, and realistically, like you mentioned, with the way Utah's season has gone so far, this is their season. This game right here is the game that they are trying to win. They're trying to ruin BYU's playoff hopes and all that stuff. I'm with you. I think on paper, Arizona State would be the answer here. But I think BYU matches up really well with Arizona State. I think it's a great matchup for them with the way Jake Retzloff's been playing. I'm with you. I think at Utah is their toughest game left. I think if they get through that game, they're going 12-0.
Yeah, and the only reason I didn't give Arizona State the edge is because I like a good hostile environment, and Arizona State, I don't know if they have that just yet. I feel like they're working on it, but the Utah fans will be out in attendance for that game. So those are the toughest games for the top four teams in the Big 12. When we come back, we're going to be talking about which Colorado players have shined the most in our opinions. This episode of Locked On Buffs is brought to you by our sponsors over at Game Time. Game Time Picks has everything you need to make sure you get the best deals on whatever event it is, whether it's sports, comedy, theater, whatever. They have it all. They have it all in prices where you toggle this feature and it shows you the total up front. So there's no surprise fees at checkout. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, and their low price guarantee means Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference if it's not the lowest price. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. This episode of Locked On Buffs is also brought to you by PFF. PFF has got you covered all season long with the best data, tools, and analysis in the game. Sign up for PFF Plus today to unlock all of their famous player grades and premium stats. Push to the playoffs in your fantasy league with in-season tools and award-winning rankings from fantasy experts like Nathan Junk, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, and stay connected to the next generation of talent with the best NFL draft coverage on the planet. No matter what you're looking for, PFF Plus has what you need to make winning decisions all season long. Sign up for PFF Plus today to win for less than $10 per month, And we're also brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for free and available wherever you get your podcast. Dalton, let's talk star power. Colorado obviously has two of the biggest stars in college football. We're well aware of Shedeur Sanders. We're well aware of Travis Hunter. Let's talk about the other guys who have sort of burst onto the scene for us. You could go ahead and start with one.
I think I'll go offensively, and I think all the talk is about Colorado's pass protection, right? And I have to look at the true freshman left tackle Jordan Seaton. I think he's really been coming on in pass protection lately, and that's always the big conversation with them, right? When you talk about it's all the main factor in them winning ball games is protecting Shedeur Sanders and allowing him to make those throws, right? And the games where they do that, it's really a problem for opposing defenses. And when you look at his pass blocking grade at 82.3. Not only does it lead the team, all right, it is the 8th best of any tackle in the Big 12. He's come in and at this point as a pass protector, at least, been everything that they have asked for in this offense, and he is a cornerstone piece. It took him a few weeks maybe to get in a rhythm, but I mean, I think he's been on fire. The first 2 weeks he struggled a bit, but I'd have to look at some of the splits here that he's had since week 3, because he might even be the best tackle in the Big 12 since then, at least in pass protection. It's been incredible to watch his progress for him to become as good as he's been. Yeah, since week 3, he has the highest pass blocking grade of any tackle in the Big 12. It's amazing, actually, the progress that he's shown in pass protection, and to have that blindside protector for Shedeur Sanders. Jordan Seaton is really going to put himself not only this year in conversations as like, wow, this is a really good freshman, but you talk about he was the number 1 offensive tackle recruit in the country. And very soon here for that, 2027 class, we're going to start talking about Jordan Seaton as one of the top tackles, if not the top tackle.
Yeah, I think he's kind of been everything that they needed across the offense line. Now, if they can only get like 4 more of him, obviously that'd be the goal, right? He's been great, though. He's been, I won't say a revelation, but he's been pretty close to a revelation this season. Pull out pressure on a freshman to step in right away, and he's done just that. I'm going to go out wide to receiver, and I'm going to go with LeJohntay Wester. It was someone that I know you were high on, and it's someone who I didn't know what his role would be. He reminds me a lot of Jimmy Horn in the sense of they're undersized, fast guys, and I just didn't know how Colorado was going to make it work with all these receivers. But I quickly learned during the spring game that Shedeur liked throwing to him, and we've seen it each of pretty much every week that Shedeur likes throwing to this guy. He only has 3 games where he doesn't have a touchdown. He has 7 touchdowns on the year. Against Arizona, he had 8 catches for 127 yards, which is his best showing of the year. Like, he is just – it feels like he's always open. He had the game-saving catch against Baylor to send it to overtime, and he's really explosive. And I kind of like having – obviously, this is like a riches of goods or whatever, embarrassment of riches, excuse me. Shedeur Sanders could just turn to any receiver, and there's a 95% chance that dude's going to make a play. And LeJohntay Wester, who, mind you, Dalton, just got the number 1 jersey from Coach Prime, which is a big deal because Coach Prime doesn't just get that out. So he's one of my stars.
No, I love him. I mean, look, listen, I'm a Florida Atlantic alum, so I keep track of what's going on down there when I can. And the last 2 years absolutely carried their offense. He was their only good offensive player, if I'm being honest with you. It was just the offense was, how many times a game can we get LeJohntay the ball? But for as small as he is, I mean, he gets open. He makes contested catches. He's competitive as hell. When I saw that he was going to Colorado with Shedeur throwing him the football, I almost got giddy because I was like, nobody knows what this guy is. This guy down at FAU, he's one of the best receivers in the country. He's a legitimate slot threat, like you mentioned, and I think he's really starting to find his rhythm the last few weeks more consistently with Shedeur. When you look at, he's got 20 targets the last 3 weeks, and he's caught all of them. I mean, he's super reliable. Here and there, he could have a drop, but even then, he only has 3 drops in the Nebraska game and none since. So this is a guy who I watched for 2 years down at FAU, and I know it's the American, I know it's a lower level and all that, but when I tell you he was all they had, he was all they had. I mean, he put up almost 1,200 yards last year for an FAU offense that had nothing else. Knowing how much Colorado throws in the slot, I love this fit when they got him, and I love the way he's playing.
Yeah. Next guy for you. You want to go on defense? We'll do one on offense, one on defense. Star.
Yeah, I'm in on that. And, man, there's a lot of good candidates here. It's because earlier in the year I talked about Nakai Hill-Green and the way he changed the defense in the run game with Levante Bentley. But lately what I've seen is BJ Green really coming on to be that big-time pass rusher that they expected to get from Arizona State, right? Six pressures in the Arizona game, 3 more this past week against Cincinnati. Been a solid run defender, keeping contain all year. I think this was a guy that, of all of the guys they brought in on the defensive line, and a lot of them very solid role players, a lot of really good run defenders, BJ Green was the one guy who among them I thought was like a star, right? And you talk about being the star pass rusher as well. If he's going to start bringing that now and bringing that momentum now, I think you start talking about, okay, this Colorado pass rush, because that was the most impressive part of their game against Arizona for me, is that their pass rush really started to get going in a way that I don't think it had all season, right? And so when you start talking about, okay, they've already been defending the run, they've already been covering. Now you start to get into if they can start pressuring quarterbacks now. And I think BJ Green would be the biggest driver of that with all the success he had at Arizona State. And Colorado blitzes a decent amount too, because they get into their man-to-man coverage and they'll send extra guys. I get that. Part of it before was that they had to send extra guys because the front four weren't getting home. But you look at BJ Green the last 3 weeks, 82.6 pass rush grade. That's really, really good stuff. I mean, you're talking about maybe not quite getting to the elite level in the 90s, but you know what? You're starting to crawl your way there. I think BJ Green lately for me, if it was 3 weeks ago, I probably would have told you Nikhai Hill-Green with the way he's impacted the run game. But BJ Green has been just spectacular the last few weeks in the pass rush.
Yeah, I like BJ Green. He's starting to perform like how we all expected him to. Like he gets second team all Pac-12. And so I think the instant expectation was like, okay, this guy's going to get double-digit sacks. And he didn't get double-digit sacks right away. So I was like, what's going on here? My guy, I don't know if he grades out as well as everyone else, but I do think that he's made some monster plays lately, and that's Preston Hodge, right? He had his best graded game, according to you guys, against Cincinnati. He's had some big interceptions, some big pass breakups. Right now, he's allowing the least amount of catches in terms of reception percentage, in terms of everyone who has 20 or more receptions allowed on Colorado. So he is someone who I think he gets overshadowed by Travis Hunter, obviously. Who doesn't? But he holds his own, right? I think when offenses look at this defense, they go, okay, Travis Hunter's there, Preston Hodge is in the slot, and DJ McKinney's on the other side. We're going to go after Preston Hodge, and I feel like he's done pretty well being the guy that they sort of attempt to pick on.
Yeah, I agree. Look, the hardest job in football, I think, is playing slot corner in such a man-heavy system. Playing man coverage from the slot is probably the hardest job in all of football. And you talk about a guy in Preston Hodge who, you're right, there are moments he gets beaten. That's just the nature of the game, right? You're playing man coverage of when receivers have a three-way go like that. And so many teams now, their best player is a slot receiver, right? So it's just, that's kind of the nature of it. But, he's competitive to the ball. He makes plays. He makes some sort of positive plays every week, even if he gets beat here and there. Like you mentioned, just had his highest coverage grade in this previous game that they just played with Cincinnati, which is big time. And to be honest, the play that I keep going back to with Hodge, that interception in the end zone against UCF early in the game, I could argue that was the play of Colorado's season, because that's a moment last year that after the Shedeur Sanders interception and the way they, sometimes we weren't entirely sure if Colorado's run defense could hold up against a team like that. And for Preston Hodge to turn around and get that interception in the end zone, the defense gets a stop on a short field. It created the momentum for everything we've seen since then, right? The big win over UCF, even a competitive loss over against Kansas State. I think we've just seen now that single play was a turning point in, okay, this team actually has a resilience to them. They have a chin. They can take one on the chin and they can punch back. And that was the ultimate punch back at the beginning of that game. Very much like, it's the same pick he threw at the beginning of the Nebraska game, but they didn't punch back, right? I think that Preston Hodge play, and you mentioned, it's funny, LaJohntay Wester before. It's like those two plays, the Hail Mary, and then to me, the interception on the first drive against UCF. Those are the two plays where I went, oh, this is a different team. Okay, now they're different. And Hodge, you're right. Is he the highest graded guy on the team? No, but he's super competitive. He fills a very important role. And I think he needs to get credit for the degree of difficulty that he has with his job, with as much man coverage as they play and him having to play in the slot all the time.
Yeah, and I think it was Kansas State, if I'm not mistaken. When Travis went down, they moved him outside, and you could tell he's more comfortable on the inside. So I think that kind of hurt him a little bit as well.
Yep.
I know I said two each, but Dalton, I'm going to suggest one to you, and I know you're going to light up about it. Nikhai Hill-Green.
Yeah. And this is one where he just, when they put him in at linebacker over Trevor Woods earlier in the year, because Trevor Woods, look, he's a former safety. He's a smaller body. He's not really equipped to handle offensive linemen and things like that physically. When they put Hill-Green in the lineup, everything just changed about their run defense. The second I threw when I was prepping for the UCF game, and I threw on the tape, and I was like, they've been actually kind of good in run defense lately. What's going on? And I see Hill-Green and Levante Bentley just so in sync and so where they need to be, right? And so much about defense, right, in the front seven and the run game is about gap control. And you see these guys constantly in the right spot and making tackles. And I'm not telling you to sit there and do anything flashy like Fred Warner and punching the football out and doing crazy stuff, but They just needed more fundamentally sound play because at the time they were getting it from their defensive line, but they weren't getting that backfill from their linebackers when it was Bentley and Trevor Woods. When they put Hill Green in there, suddenly it's just fundamentally sound linebacker play. You watch them over and over and over. Earlier in the year, one of my favorite things to watch was the end zone shot of Colorado's run defense because so many plays, every single gap was filled. And when all the gaps are filled, running backs have nowhere to go, right? In Colorado, you're not really going to break the edge on Colorado because it's very fast on defense, right? So Hill Green and his impact that he's had on the rest of the front seven, to me, has been the single biggest reason that their run defense has been so improved.
Yeah, I think he's kind of been like I won't say like the heart and soul of the defense, but he's definitely been one of the leaders of this defense, and he hits hard. It's not a stat, it's not an analytic, but he hits hard. He makes plays, and sometimes that's all you need, right? So Nikhai Hill-Green is another one. I'd also want to shout out Cameron Sillman-Craig, just in terms of how impactful he's been. I think Coach Prime called him the unsung hero of this defense. He leads the team in tackles, it feels like, almost every game, makes big plays, and they can rely on him, which is a very, very big deal. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to do an early preview of that Texas Tech battle. This episode of Locked On Buffs is always brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day for free and available wherever you get your podcast. So thank you guys for tuning in, making me your first listen of the day. Dalton, let's dive right into it. We both deemed that this was their toughest remaining game. They have to go to Lubbock. Tortillas will be thrown. For those of you who aren't familiar, Texas Tech throws tortillas onto the field. And the backstory is, and no one really knows, but this is the most believed backstory, is that I forgot who it was, but someone said the only thing to do in Lubbock was football and the tortilla factory, because I guess there was a tortilla factory. And so now the students throw tortillas onto the field. So there will be a delay at one point to clean up the tortillas. So we talked about this off air. Texas Tech's quarterback Baron Morton went down with an injury. Obviously, they brought in Will Hammond too. For those of you who aren't familiar with Will Hammond, I personally think that he's probably going to end up being one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12. Elite 11 guy that really impressed at the Elite 11. Usually the guys that do well at the Elite 11 are like the Ohio State commits or the Alabama commits or the Texas commits or whatever. And he was drawing a lot of praise. Josh Pate from 24/7 Sports said he was the only guy that performed like he had a mortgage and kids to take care of. Like he's just all business all the time. And so let's talk about how these teams match up. Do you think Colorado matches up well with this Texas Tech team?
I think what you're going to get is a high-scoring game because Texas Tech, their offense is very good, and you talk about a team that has balance on offense regardless of which quarterback is in there. It starts with the running back, Taj Brooks, who's one of the most physical running backs in the country, and I think a guy who very well could give Colorado problems because when they played Kansas State, I don't think you saw so much that they got blown up on the offensive line in Kansas State, blocked the living hell out of them. It was that DJ Giddens was breaking tackles and getting a boatload of yards after contact. And Taj Brooks is that same kind of guy. I think he's close to 230 pounds. He can really just – it's so hard. One guy can't tackle Taj Brooks. That's the best way I can put it. So this Colorado team, they have to buckle up and play physical. And then they complement it with a pretty explosive passing game. You got guys like Josh Kelly and Caleb Douglas and Jalen Conyers at tight end who can make big plays. You got an explosive passing game that, when I watch Baron Morton throw, I think he really likes to work outside the numbers. So they're a passing game that stretches you horizontally. They're a run game that comes right downhill on you. But on the flip side, their defense is not very good at all. I'll be honest with you. They have the fourth worst coverage grade in the Power 5 for us. They've given up an absolute ton of points. They lost their game to TCU. Yes, in part because Baron Morton got hurt, but Will Hammond came in and played pretty well. It was more so there's times when they just can't make stops. Their secondary, they lost a lot of pieces in their secondary, especially at safety into the NFL draft. Guys like Dadrion Taylor-Demerson and Tyler Owens, they can't cover. And when you talk about playing against a Colorado team with all the weapons and Shedeur Sanders and everything they have, if you can't cover, you're in to give up a lot of points. So I think it'll come down to Texas Tech's balance versus really just Shedeur Sanders And it's hard to imagine he wouldn't have a big game. Which defense can maybe force the other quarterback into a mistake or two? And I think the more likely of the two to make a mistake is Baron Morton, because there are days when he looks really good and there are days when he looks really shaky and the ball security is not there. I think Texas Tech would be wise to control the game with Taj Brooks, but if Colorado can force Morton into a mistake or two, and usually they're big mistakes when they come with Morton, then you're talking about gaining an advantage, because I'm not sure, honestly, how Texas Tech makes stops against Colorado.
Yeah, and I like the point that you made about forcing Morton into mistake. And it was the same thing with Brendan Sorsby for Cincinnati for me. Because going into that game, Sorsby had only been sacked 10 times and Morton's only been sacked 10 times. And so it's like you're probably not going to get to him. Like the offensive line holds up well enough and he gets the ball out quick enough to where you're not going to sack him. But if you force him to go off his first read, if you force him to sort of have to feel like he has to make a play, that's when you force a mistake. In terms of their defense, I know you talked about your guys' grades for them. They currently rank 126th in all of college football in total defense, ranking above the powerhouse that is Middle Tennessee, Ball State, Mississippi State, New Mexico, Utah State, Oklahoma State, who is another team that Colorado has to play with a terrible defense, and then Kent State. So they have one of the worst defenses in college football overall. And every way you look at it, their defense cannot stop this Colorado offense. For Colorado's offense, I think a key to victory for me is, and you mentioned at the Kansas State game, what really shocked me about Kansas State was how successful the offensive linemen were at getting to the next level, which I think kind of made the linebackers look bad. And then it put guys like Shiloh Sanders on the island to get shaken out of his shoes by DJ Giddens, which, I mean, I would say 99% of people will get shaken out of their shoes when you're one-on-one with any running back. So if Colorado can sort of prevent that from happening again, I think they will be A-okay. And then if it's a shootout, I like Colorado's chances regardless.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think absolutely. And they do need to fill all those gaps like we talked about before. And you're right. I mean, Kansas State, they execute so well in the run game with all the gap schemes and things they run. So Texas Tech's run schemes are not nearly as complicated, right, as to defend, and there's not the option threat. Like Baron Morton's not really going to take off and run, because you have to worry about Avery Johnson, where the difference with Texas Tech, and I think it's been a more comfortable spot for Colorado's run defense, is that when they know they don't have that option threat, there's not the big threat of quarterback run, because that's what hurt them. That's what's hurt them, honestly, more often this year. I know Giddens got him in that game, but more often outside of that game, it's been quarterback run that's hurt them. We talk about KJ Jefferson got his yards. Sawyer Robertson got yards against Colorado. I think that's really even Brendan Sorsby, and I know that was mostly scrambling, but he got a good amount of yards as a quarterback against them. I think it's a more stable environment for Colorado to succeed in the run game, but you got to tackle. Taj Brooks is so hard to tackle. I mean, he's such an animal back there. But no, and I think you're right with Texas Tech's defense. Like, we've got them; they're the fourth lowest graded defense in the Power Five. You're talking about Purdue, Mississippi State, Oklahoma State. I look at this Texas Tech, and even honestly this week, they're playing Iowa State this week. And I think that could be another advantage when you talk about this is Colorado's got another week to just practice and get better. They got the bye week this week. Texas Tech's got a tough road game at Iowa State that I'm honestly not expecting them to win. And even in that game, I don't exactly know how they're going to stop Rocco Becht and his receivers in that game. Yeah. So it's a struggle when you can't make stops and you give up as many points as Texas Tech does. You're always in trouble. Even when they had a lead, they had a 2-score lead against TCU and blew that game. So I think you're talking about a good matchup for Colorado, as long as they don't let Taj Brooks take the game over like DJ Giddens did.
Yeah, Colorado's got a path to the Big 12 title. They got a path to the playoff, and it starts in Lubbock. Dalton, I appreciate you hopping on and joining the show. We always love having you join us and providing your insight. Tell the people where they can find you and what you're working on.
PFF.com for our written content, all of our great analysts, plus myself. There's always some great written content, NFL and college there. And then you talk about, for myself and Max Chadwick, we've got our PFF College Football Show on YouTube Sundays at 9 a.m. Eastern. We go review all the biggest games from the previous day, the previous weekend. And on Tuesday nights, we will have a preview of the upcoming games. Colorado, Texas Tech will certainly be on that list, one of the biggest games in the Big 12 next week. So stay tuned for that. And all the happenings in the Big 12, because we're those top 4 teams that we've been talking about this episode. We're going to be talking about all 4 of them a lot. You'll be seeing, I know we'll have Colorado, Texas Tech, and we will have BYU, Utah as a preview next week. So tune in next week, Tuesday night, 6 Eastern, 4 Mountain Time. And it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have a fun November watching this playoff race.
It's going to be an important November for a lot of teams. I appreciate all you guys for tuning in every single day, making me your first listen. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to like, subscribe, and follow. This has been another episode of Locked on Buffs.